Are you afraid of God?
No, but I'm afraid of you.
Have you ever wondered about the connection between the flying city of Columbia and the underwater city of Rapture? What if I told you time travel? Well, it's actually more complicated than that. This series will tell you everything you need to understand BioShock's entire story, utilizing audio diaries, voxophones, kinetoscopes, and gameplay footage, in addition to our narration. My name is Magic, and I'm narrating the story of Columbia and BioShock Infinite.
And I am Jack Tanner, and I'm narrating the story of Rapture and everything else BioShock. Snork Gaming, Zivik, and Fu Shivu were kind enough to contribute gameplay footage for this series. If you'd like to see more of their stuff, check them out. Other clips are used as well, and they are sourced in the credits and description.
The infinite universes of BioShock operate on a concept of limited infinity, using a multi-dimensional theory that is fact in those universes, albeit unproven in our own. Through the natural progression of time, anything that deviates by choice or chance can become divergent timelines, each separate from the other. However, divergences that are not significantly different can be representationally superimposed into a single timeline bundle. The result is a tree with constants, clearly visible branches, trunks, and roots, as well as variables, an infinite and immeasurable system of invisibly fine branches branching off of other branches. As illustrated by quantum mechanics such as the observer effect, life in the form of the observer matters just as much as the fabric of the universe itself, and can be impossible to tell whether the universe creates the mind or the mind creates the universe. In one such universe, and many like it, on April 19, 1874, a baby was born, and then named Booker DeWitt. Elsewhere in the 1870s, a child named Rosalind Lutece was born. For the next 20 years, Rosalind became entranced with physics, and she became one of the world's top physicists. One of her first inventions was the voxophone, which allowed one to make audio recordings. She used her knowledge of atomic structure to invent the Lutece field, which allowed an atom to float midair. She documented her discoveries in barriers to transdimensional travel in 1889.
When I was a girl, I dreamt of standing in a room looking at a girl who was and was not myself, who stood looking at another girl who also was and was not myself. My mother took this for a nightmare. I saw it as the beginning of a career in physics. I had trapped the atom in mid-air. Colleagues called my Lutece field quantum levitation, but in fact it was nothing of the sort. Magicians levitate. My atom simply failed to fall. If an atom could be suspended indefinitely, well, why not an apple? If an apple, why not a city?
Through her experiments, Rosalind discovered the Lutece particle and found that she could interact with an atom and see it respond. She slowly began to discover that someone else interacted similarly in return. The other person was her, from another timeline, one where she had been born male, as Robert Lutece. On December 29, 1890, a portion of the United States military conducted an expedition that resulted in the Wounded Knee Massacre. Booker DeWitt, now a soldier, was among the men who fought the Native Americans. He fought so brutally that his fellow soldiers nicknamed him the White Injun. Booker later came to regret his actions, and in 1891 he attended a baptism led by Preacher Whitting. When Whitting tried to baptize Booker, Booker refused. In 1892, Booker became employed by Pinkerton's National Detective Agency. Eventually, Booker's wife became pregnant. Mrs. DeWitt died giving birth to Anna DeWitt. However, another timeline existed where Booker accepted the baptism. In that timeline, Booker felt his sins had been washed away. He renewed himself in religious belief and changed his name to Father Zachary Hale Comstock. In 1892, a tear in the fabric of reality appeared before Comstock. The tear showed a possible future depicting the scene of a flying city destroying buildings. Comstock believed that the Archangel Columbia showed him this vision to encourage him to build a flying city to bring justice to the mountains of man. Comstock became a famous preacher, and eventually lobbied his way into politics, giving him the dexterity to find a respectable amount of wealth. In Comstock's timeline, Rosalind became relatively successful with her experiments with her Lutece field. He met Rosalind and they partnered to achieve their shared dream of a flying city. Rosalind wanted to progress science and use her invention to levitate a city, and Comstock wanted his prophecy fulfilled. Comstock agreed to fund Rosalind's research in the hopes their dream could come to fruition. Unfortunately, Comstock's money was not enough to fund the construction of an entire city. In 1893, Comstock approached the United States Congress for the funds to complete the construction of a city, appealing to the Christian values of spreading the word of Christianity and the greatness of American exceptionalism. Congress agreed and the construction accelerated on the city. Comstock decided to name the city Columbia, after the Archangel. Entrepreneur Jeremiah Fink, owner of Fink Manufacturing, then began to assist with the construction of Columbia. Fink saw the promise of what the city could become and wanted in on the market.
The truth is, I don't have a lot of time for all that prophecy nonsense. I tell you, belief is just a commodity. Old Comstock, well, he does produce, but like any tradesman, he's obliged to barter his product for the earthly ores. You see, one does not raise a barn on song alone. No, sir. That's Fink timber, a Fink hammer, and Fink's hand to swing it. He needs me, lest he soil his own.
Comstock's wife, now known as Lady Comstock, became just as reformed as her husband.
Love the prophet because he loves the sinner. Love the sinner because he is you. Without the sinner, what need is there for a redeemer? Without sin, what grace has forgiveness? To those who loved me, I was the most generous of souls. There was no pain I would deny them, no betrayal I would not gladly give. And when I had scorched the hearts of all who loved me, the prophet said, "There is nothing you can do for which I will not forgive you. For God has granted me sight, and through his eyes, even you are loved."
In the following months, Rosalind's research benefited from all the funding she received. Communication with Robert was slow at first, but once communication became more concrete, they managed to collaborate to build the Lutece device, which allowed one to move from one reality to another. Comstock was fascinated with the invention and personally used it to view other realities, so that he could call upon for knowledge when needed. Such knowledge earned him the title of prophet.
When a soul is born again, what happens to the one left behind in the baptismal water? Is he simply gone? Or does he exist in some other world, alive, with sin intact?
Comstock seems to have been made sterile by simple exposure to our contraption. A theory. Just as sexual reproduction can de-emphasize the traits of each parent, so goes the effect of multiple realities on our own. Your traits dissipate until they become unrecognizable or cease to exist.
Comstock's use of the Lutece device had the side effect of making him sterile and age somewhat faster. Meanwhile, construction of the city began to come to a close. Columbia entered the 1893 Chicago World Fair, Columbian Exposition, as an astounding marvel of science. Another marvel of Columbia was the kinetoscope video recorder. On September 9th, Comstock presented Columbia and gave many public addresses about the importance of the city to not only America, but also to the world in Christianity.
And then the Archangel showed a vision. A city, lighter than air. I asked her, "Why do you show this to me, Archangel? I'm not a strong man. I'm not a righteous man. I am not a holy man." And she told me the most remarkable thing. "You're right, prophet. But if grace is within the grasp of one such as you, how can anyone else not see it in themselves?" And the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great, and he repented he had made man on the earth. 40 days and 40 nights of the stuff, and he left not a thing that walked alive. You see, my friends, even God is entitled to a do-over. And what is Columbia if not another ark? For another time. As the months and years turned to memories, so did the men of Congress turn to righteousness. And through the technology of men, the dollars of Washington, the Lord worked his will upon Columbia and raised her high above the Sodom below. And when I came to Washington, there were few in Congress who saw my vision for Columbia. But it is the burden of the prophet to bring the wicked to righteousness. For what am I, if not a mirror to reflect the face of God? The Archangel tells me that Columbia will only survive so long as my line sits the throne. Yet Lady Comstock produces no child. I have done what a man can do, yet there is no child. I have asked Lutece about the matter, but even she refuses to help.
In order for his prophecy to come true, Comstock needed a child. Rosalind informed him of how his overuse of the Lutece device led to his impotence. Comstock asked her to help him have a child, and she quickly refused. Meanwhile, people impressed at the fair began moving to live in Columbia, currently stationed over Chicago. However, a problem arose when there was no lower-class workers to upkeep maintenance in Columbia.
I told you, Comstock. You sell 'em paradise, and the customers expect cherubs for every chore. No menials in God's kingdom. Well, I have a man in Georgia who'll lease us as many Negro convicts as you can board. Why, you can say they're simple souls in penance for rising above their station. Whatever eases your conscience, I suppose.
Fink began importing African-American convicts from Georgia into Columbia to use as workers. Much of the United States at this time, especially Columbia, was quite discriminatory in way of race. Meanwhile, Comstock and Rosalind argued over what to do about this impotence and need for a child. Rosalind proposed that they acquire a child from a timeline where he wasn't impotent, and Comstock agreed. Rosalind used the Lutece device to open a tear to send Robert to arrange a meeting with an alternate version of Comstock. In the timeline where Booker refused baptism, Booker was in an extreme amount of debt with very bad people. On October 8th, Robert Lutece approached him and offered him a deal. Robert offered to pay off all Booker's debt in exchange for his daughter, Anna. To save his own skin, Booker accepted the deal and gave Anna to Robert. Booker immediately regretted his decision and chased Robert down, where he found Robert leaving through a tear. Booker tried to take Anna back from Comstock, who ordered the Luteces to turn the Lutece device off. The tear shut, cutting off Anna's pinky finger. Before long, Robert began to fall ill, due to the effects of being taken from one's own reality. Fortunately, he had Rosalind to look after him.
When I finally brought my brother through, he seemed to lack the capacity to square his own reality with this one. I suspected such a thing would happen, yet had no means to accommodate his distress. His behavior was that of the feeble-minded. He hemorrhaged nearly continuously from his nose. Naturally, I was able to transfuse him from my own veins and thus avoid catastrophe. In the end, it was music that proved therapeutic and grounded his thoughts. A middle C vibrates at 262 hertz, no matter what the universe. The Lutece field entangled my quantum atom with waves of light, allowing for safe measurement. Sound familiar, brother? That's because you were measuring precisely the same atom from a neighboring world. We used the universe as a telegraph. Switching the field on or off became dots and dashes. Dreadfully slow, but now you and I could whisper through the wall. Brother, what Comstock failed to understand is that our contraption is a window not into prophecy, but probability. But his money means the Lutece field could become the Lutece tear, a window between worlds, a window through which you and I might finally be together. You have been transfused, brother, into a new reality, but your body rejects the cognitive dissonance through confusion and hemorrhage. But we are together, and I will mend you. For what separates us now but a single chromosome? Brother, I have told you many times that I encountered this particular Caesar before he crossed the Rubicon. When I met Comstock, he was little more than a preacher, able to move both members of the flock or members of Congress with equal dexterity. He believed in my work, and his influence bought the funds I so needed. And if he wanted to use tears to play prophet, that was his prerogative. But at some point, the man became incapable of distinguishing his performance from his person. I sit in judgment. But then again, it was I who built the stage.
Rosalind made several recordings to give to Robert to remind him of who he was and where he was. After Anna had also grown accustomed to her reality, Comstock presented her to the public in Columbia. He renamed her Elizabeth and claimed that Lady Comstock had given birth to a miracle child, the Lamb of Columbia, in just 7 days. Lady Comstock, however, refused to allow the child to live in Comstock House, and so Comstock began to look for alternatives to Elizabeth's housing. After the World Fair ended, Columbia began a tour around the eastern and southern portions of the United States, making periodic stops at major cities. Jeremiah Fink's brother, Albert Fink, composed music for a living. Tears were much more common in Columbia than elsewhere due to the Lutece device's use, and Albert managed to find new tears. Through the tears he could hear music that hadn't been designed yet. So in 1894, Albert began plagiarizing the songs he heard through tears and selling them as his own work, gaining a fortune that even his brother could respect.
I had thought you a fool, dear brother, when you told me that you heard wonderful music trumpeting from holes in the thin air. I began to doubt your mental integrity. But not only have you made your fortune from these doodads, you have lit the path for me as well.
Some of the most popular songs Albert plagiarized were After You've Gone, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, Fortunate Son, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, God Only Knows, Goodnight Irene, Shiny Happy People, Tainted Love, and Wild Prairie Rose. Jeremiah Fink began to research into tears to try to increase his wealth. Through the tears, he found another reality with a brilliant scientist named Dr. Yi Su-chong.
My dear brother, these holes in the thin air continue to pay dividends. I know not which musician you borrow your notes from, but if he has half the genius of the biologist I now observe, well, then you are to be the Mozart of Colombia.
The unchallenged primary political party of Colombia was the Founders Party. The leading members of the Founders Party in Colombia consisted of Comstock, their leader, Fink, the richest man in Colombia, Flambeau, Fink's associate, Saltonstall, Marlowe, Vanderwald, and H. Clark. As 1894 came to a close, many of the workers in Colombia felt oppressed, and they formed a protest group called the Vox Populi. As the group became more organized, it became a larger threat to the existing party. So on December 28th, Comstock used his position to have the Vox Populi crushed. 40 members of the Vox Populi died, and the rest went into hiding. When Lady Comstock found what he had done, she began to doubt him.
Tonight, the prophet moved against his political enemies. He preaches mercy, but 40 souls lie tonight dead in unmarked graves. If a man was ever unworthy of grace, who would be my husband? But when I was beyond redemption, he offered it anyway. How can I deny forgiveness to one who with love granted it to me?
On January 4th, 1895, Lady Comstock became delusioned of her husband. She knew the miracle child nonsense was a lie. She confronted and accused Rosalind of being responsible for Elizabeth. Rosalind tried to explain Elizabeth's sudden appearance, but Lady Comstock had difficulty believing her.
I know the prophet is a liar, but he cannot be. I know the prophet is a murderer, but he cannot be. For if the future lies only in the imagination of God, why would he reveal it to such a monster? Lady Comstock seems to believe the child is a result of some errant act of carnality between myself and her beloved prophet. I told the poor woman the truth, that the child was a product of our little contraption, but I think she found that less believable than her delusion. Lutez says the bastard is a creation not of her womb, but of some unholy science. I do not know which is true. The child is no more divine than I. What says that for my husband's prophecy? He begs my silence, but I can only offer him forgiveness. But with repentance need come truth. I can suffer his lies no longer.
After thinking it over, Lady Comstock decided that she could not live with the lies anymore, and she told her husband that she was going to go to the public with the truth. Upon hearing this, Comstock made arrangements for her assassination so that she couldn't expose him. Lady Comstock's maid, Daisy Fitzroy, walked into her room to find Lady Comstock had been murdered. Comstock found it easy to then blame Fitzroy as the murderer. Fitzroy went into hiding, met the Vox Populi, and managed to levy her underground celebratory status into high-ranking position in the Vox Populi. Lady Comstock's tomb became an important icon in Colombia. Meanwhile, Elizabeth had become unruly. Comstock began construction on a new structure in Columbia called Monument Island. He wanted it to be not only a symbol of Columbia, but also the home from which his daughter would see the world. Through the tears, Fink saw Suchong using gene-altering substances called Adam and Eve. Fink took note of the locations where he could find Adam and began sending underwater expeditions to acquire it. Fink improved upon Suchong's design by adding an oxidizing agent to make them ingestible. His so-called invention became known as a vigor. Due to the altered state of the vigor, Fink chose to use salt as a catalyst instead of the much more expensive Eve substance. Many vigors were created and plagiarized from Suchong's creations. However, one of Fink's employees, Marlowe, who also happened to be a member of the Founders Party, designed a new vigor called Murder of Crows. Fink and Marlowe began selling vigors, marketing them as supernatural powers gifted to mankind.
These holes have shown me yet another wonder, though I've yet to see the application for it. They illuminate a merger of machine and man that is somehow the lesser, yet the greater of both parties. The process seems to be irreversible. Perhaps, though, Comstock will have some need of this kind of thing to keep watch in that tower he is building.
Through the tears, Fink also saw cyborg creatures known as Big Daddies, residing in another reality. He used resources from Fink's manufacturing to reverse engineer what he found, building his own cyborg creature. After a few iterations in a few months, Fink managed to create the Songbird, a hulking robotic bird creature. He put Elizabeth and Songbird through a series of experiments to try to get them to imprint on one another. What would have been a long and grueling process occurred rather rapidly as the two developed genuine affection for one another.
Fink's bird is a repulsive creature, but I suppose a prison needs a guard. What surprised me is not how the girl has imprinted upon the monster. After all, one might observe a baby chimpanzee accept a wire replica for its mother. But I did not expect the brute to be capable of forming an attachment in return. Perhaps it could prove a better father to her than the two she has known.
It has occurred to me that this breakthrough regarding the Songbird casts my arrangement with the Oriental Doctor in a new light. What more could be gained by this continued partnership? What secrets that I could not answer for myself? Suchong can only offer table scraps, and Jeremiah Fink has richer meat in mind.
Fink, having learned everything he could from the tears in which Suchong resided, decided to try to turn his research and funds in other directions. For 3 years, Columbia continued forward, maintaining its balance. However, the divide between rich and poor widened considerably, and Comstock's racist attitude deepened.
As a boy, I had a dog named Bill. Like all dogs, Bill was a loyal friend. If we had not fed him, Bill would have been loyal. If we had struck him, Bill would have been loyal. Only when the colored man can make that claim will he take his place in society. To tax the black more than the white, is that not cruel? To forbid the mixing of the races, is that not cruel? To give the vote to the white man and deny it to the yellow, the black, the red, is that not cruel? But is it not cruel to banish your children from a perfect garden? Or drown your flock under an ocean of water? Cruelty can be instructive. And what is Columbia, if not the schoolhouse of the Lord?
On October 31st, 1900, development of a vigor called Devil's Kiss started a fire in Fink Manufacturing. The section of the complex that held the fire was disconnected from the rest of Columbia and allowed to sink towards the earth like a slow, flaming meteor. Fink Manufacturing officially denied any involvement in the fire. On January 1st, 1901, Columbia's police were repressing Vox Populi protesters when violence broke out between the two groups. Chief of Police Jefferson Poole publicly claimed that the violence perpetrated from the Vox Populi would not be tolerated. Later that year, Columbia traveled westward over the Pacific Ocean as part of a new initiative to help the world. Columbia flew above China as the Boxer Rebellion was underway, and people of Columbia fired upon Chinese citizens, creating an international incident. On July 6, 1902, the United States Congress ordered Columbia to return. Now that the world realized what dangers Columbia could cause, Comstock then announced Columbia's secession, marking July 6 as Columbia's Independence Day. Columbia then ascended higher than ever as it vanished into the clouds. Meanwhile, one young girl of Columbia, Constance Field, tried to message Elizabeth. However, Elizabeth was locked up in the Monument Island, never allowed to leave, with only Songbird as company.
This is for the miracle child. Hello. I'm sorry your mother, Lady Comstock, is dead. I think she is altogether better than mine. Since you live there, can you tell me why the tower has been closed? People say it's poor weather, then the pox, then a haunting. If it is a secret, I promise not to tell a soul. Your pen friend, Constance.
On July 23rd, Chief Poole made a public announcement that all strikers in Fink Manufacturing had been rounded up and jailed. He extended his gratitude to Fink Manufacturing, who supplied the police with skyhooks that assisted in catching runaways on the railways. Meanwhile, Constance tried to contact Elizabeth once again, this time through Rosalind.
Madame Lutece, I have read all your books on the sciences. Mama says it's not a fit occupation for a lady, but I think she's jealous of our cleverness. Is it true that only you are allowed to visit the girl in the tower? If the lamb is lonely too, I should like to meet her, as we would have much in common. Warmest regards, Constance.
By this time, open hatred of former President Abraham Lincoln became normal. Members of the Founders Party felt that he betrayed conditionally held political practices and beliefs for people of different races. Colombia no longer answered to the United States, and so people openly detested Lincoln, calling him the Great Apostate. On February 13, 1903, Daisy Fitzroy revealed to the rest of Colombia that she was in charge of the Vox Populi. On November 23rd, members of the police force planted a bundle of dynamite in a trash can and wrote Vox on it. The police later came back and claimed to have foiled a bomb plot of the Vox Populi.
As to the matter of religion, let me place myself in the camp of the agnostic. I pretend to understand the mysteries of the infinite no more than you, Comstock, or anyone else for that matter. But for the sake of argument, let's say this is all one unhappy accident, and we are all alone in our toils. Then who would Comstock use to control and shame us with rules that apply only to those with not a penny in their pocket? If there were no God, you could rest assured the first deed done by the first rich man would be inventing him.
In 1904, the company Peyton Lane Easter & Sons invented automated stallions, meant to replace the organic horses. Comstock and the Lutesses noticed that Elizabeth had strange powers regarding the tares, but they didn't understand it very well. Comstock constructed Monument Island to act as a siphon to limit her powers from getting out of hand. In 1905, the company Vanderwall and Palmer started selling skyhooks to civilians. Chen Lin also started up his own business and gunsmith shop. On March 16th, the Vox Populi attacked the prison to let the imprisoned workers out, but the police fought back. Chief Poole was praised for ending the attack, but criticized for the prisoners that did manage to escape. Later, Comstock had public addresses criticizing Lincoln.
And when the Angel Columbia gave unto the founders the tools to build a new Eden, they did so without hesitation. For 85 years they prepared the way of the Lord. But when the great apostate came, he brought war with him, and the fields of Eden were soaked with the blood of brothers. The only emancipation he had to offer was death. What exactly was the great emancipator emancipating the Negro from? From his daily bread, from the nobility of honest work, from wealthy patrons who sponsored them from cradle to grave, from clothing and shelter. And what have they done with their freedom? Why, go to Finkton and you shall find out. No animal is born free, except the white man. And it is our burden to care for the rest of creation.
On April 11, 1906, police officer Harrison Thacker assassinated Chief Poole using a sniper rifle. Thacker, being Poole's subordinate, then took over as the new police chief. Only a drunkard's testimony implicated Thacker, which no one took seriously. Thacker then began a campaign against anyone associated with the Vox Populi. On May 17, 1907, Thacker led the police on a bloody raid of Vox Populi's hideout, with heavy losses on all sides.
This evening, on my way back from supper, my theory became reality. A spontaneous tear had opened in the market district, emitting both sights and sounds. I observed what I could only imagine to be some future version of Columbia. Though familiar, strange red flags with a small yellow icon flew from her rooftops. Although we can lock up the girl, it appears her powers will not be imprisoned so easily.
Rosalind found a tear herself, and through it she saw a possible future where the Vox Populi ruled Columbia. Rosalind noted that the siphon wasn't foolproof. Meanwhile, Fink had a breakthrough in his cyborg experiments. He used what he had learned with Songbird to create a more human-like robotic guards. Samuel Gerst was one of the scientists working on the siphon, and he contracted cancer due to exposure. Fink used Samuel to create the first handyman. He revealed them to the public as great defenders, protectors, and workers of Columbia.
I tell you, William, it's getting so the foxes are afraid of the hens. If Fink was going to hire a bunch of goons to keep an eye on the handymen, he should have found some with less yellow in the belly. Now they're hiding away from Tin Man invalids in their precious little guard room. If you need to get in there on your shift, the code is 2847.
The Prophet is dying. The metastasis has aged him so quickly. Why does this Comstock decay, while a Comstock in another world remains fit? If genetics are destiny, what accounts for the difference? Perhaps exposure to the contraption. It merits further study.
Rosalind took note of how Comstock was aging quickly. In 1908, Haiti Gerst, Samuel's wife, was having trouble adjusting to being married to a cyborg.
Samuel always thought that the pew on Sunday went hand in hand with the desk on Monday. Science is the slow revelation of God's blueprint. After 2 years in the Lamb's Tower on Monument Island, he took ill with cancer of the stomach. I prayed to the prophet, and the prophet delivered unto us a miracle through his servant Fink. I do not know if I will ever get used to a husband bound in a skeleton of metal, but better a handyman than a dead one.
On June 4, 1908, Daisy Fitzroy led an attack on the office of the treasurer, Montgomery Billings, to try to destroy the records of the financial debts of many low-caste workers. Meanwhile, Fink hired photographers to scour Columbia for any inventions that could be learned through tears.
That ghastly Fink fellow has been busy of late. He has sent his minions out to prowl the city, on the lookout for tears wherever they might appear. They are armed with camera and voxophone. One could only presume he is no longer content to steal patents from his own reality. No surprise, then, his scientific breakthroughs. I imagine I could also appropriate parlor tricks like incinerating trees with the snap of my fingers. But the universe offers more delicious fish to fry.
Samuel Gerst was ridiculed by the public as a subhuman being. Haiti loved him anyway. However, she contracted a fatal illness and began to die. Shortly before her death, she left him a recording to play whenever he lost his temper.
Samuel, when the spells of anger come, I want you to play this recording and remember that I am the proudest woman in Columbia to have been your wife. They said your soul was choked by the fumes in that metal box, but this I do not believe. And we shall meet again on that eternal shore. both of us whole and smiling. I love you. I love you. I love you.
Samuel never went anywhere without the recording. Later that year, Comstock felt his skin color was being questioned.
In front of all the men, the sergeant looked at me and said, "Your family tree shelters a teepee or two, doesn't it, son?" This lie, this calumny had followed me all my life. From that day, no man truly called me comrade. It was only when I burnt the teepees with the squaws inside did they take me as one of their own. Only blood can redeem blood.
On May 7, 1909, Chief Thacker and his men managed to capture Fitzroy. Dr. Francis Pinchot made arrangements so that he could be transferred to his care in Comstock House before her sentencing to study her. On May 8th, he went to the police station to retrieve Fitzroy. She had been put in deplorable conditions by the officers, including the case officer Garrett. On May 9th, Pinchot interviewed Fitzroy, who was now in his custody. She refused to speak most of the time. Fitzroy's official sentence was announced to occur on May 14th. On May 10th, Pinchot interviewed Fitzroy again, and they exchanged stories of how they started in Columbia. Pinchot's advisor, Dr. Kittery, began to press Pinchot for results. On May 11th, Pinchot told Fitzroy that his colleagues planned to cut her brain open to find out what she knew if the interviews didn't work. On May 12th, Pinchot had Fitzroy take an intelligence test. He was surprised to find that she scored higher than the white male category, including himself. After the official interview, Fitzroy offered Pinchot a deal. If he helped her escape, she would minimize the bloodshed. Pinchot spoke with Kittery again, who still insisted on the brain surgery. On May 13th, Pinchot fell in love with Fitzroy's mind. When the Vox Populi broke into Comstock House to rescue her, he gave her his keys and money to let her escape. When she did, she killed him anyway, not forgiving him for the side he chose. William R. Foreman was a successful cinematographer in Columbia, and he had the goal of making hundreds of movies, many of which were ported to kinetoscopes. On July 2nd, on his 99th movie, William stumbled and fell to his death. His fans recovered the 99th movie and published it in the kinetoscope in his honor. That year, the Lutesses used the Lutess device to see into the future through the tears, and they saw that Elizabeth was the one who would destroy the world. They had been researching why she had her strange powers.
Our contraption shows us the girl is the flame that shall ignite the world. My brother says we must undo what we have done. But time is more an ocean than a river. Why try to bring in a tide that will only again go out? What makes the girl different? I suspect it has less to do with what she is, and rather more with what she is not. A small part of her remains from where she came. It would seem the universe does not like its peas mixed with its porridge. My brother has presented me with an ultimatum. If we do not send the girl back from where we brought her, he and I must part. Where he sees an empty page, I see King Lear. But he is my brother, so I shall play my part, knowing it shall all end in tears.
Robert was burdened by his conscience. He and Rosalind agreed to try to right the wrong they had helped commit that resulted in Elizabeth. The Luteces began to look into sending Elizabeth back. However, Comstock found out. He sent Fink to use his intellect to sabotage the Lutece device in exchange for all the Luteces' parents. On October 31st, when the Luteces used it, it scattered their temporal and spatial stability, making them perceive time differently. However, from a linear point of view, it appeared as if they just disappeared, and so it was reported that the Luteces died in a freak accident.
Comstock has sabotaged our contraption, yet we are not dead. A theory. We are scattered amongst the possibility space. But my brother and I are together, and so I'm content. He is not. The business with the girl lies unresolved, but perhaps there is one who can finish it in our stead.
That's insanity. What proof would you have that Mr. Fink would hurt the Luteces?
The Luteces told me.
The Luteces? When?
Yesterday morning.
Rupert! They've been dead these 7 days.
At one point, Luteces jumped to 1910, where they considered trying to become normal once again, but they ended up deciding to remain scattered.
Our current state of being, or lack thereof, has left my brother unfulfilled. The biological urge to leave one's mark is strong, and it is not an impossibility. We could instantiate ourselves back in Columbia, return to an old life for the possibility of creating new. But we died in that world. Returning would mean giving up part of us, ourselves. We'd become flesh and all that it is heir to. The mysteries of the universe would become once again mysteries.
One man goes into the waters of baptism, a different man comes out, born again. But who is that man who lies submerged? Perhaps that swimmer is both sinner and saint, until he is revealed unto the eyes of man.
Cornelius Slate was a former American soldier who fought at Wounded Knee and later in the Boxer Rebellion. In Colombia, he was captain in Comstock's army. In 1911, he assembled his troops for an inspection and noticed Vivian Monroe, the daughter of one of his former colleagues.
God makes all kinds of soldiers, but he only made one Cornelius Slate. My father followed him up San Juan Hill, through the legations in Peking, and as he put it, through hell the order was given. At today's muster, Slate asked me if I was Sergeant Monroe's daughter. I said, yes, sir, I am. Slate said, your father always wanted a son. I hope the fool has wisdom enough to recognize his good fortune.
On August 15th, 1911, a model of robotic sentry called the Motorized Patriot became public knowledge and later commonly used by the police force in Colombia. By about this time, Comstock House was used as a re-education center, where the top scientists of Columbia, that weren't already working for Fink, would sterilize or even lobotomize patients deemed unruly. The top scientist was Dr. P. Pettifog. By 1912, the Fraternal Order of the Raven formed as a religious organization that held a radical interpretation of Christianity, centered around Lady Comstock.
Sweet Mother of Columbia, why do we worship three symbols in your memory? We worship the sword, so that we might avenge you. We worship the raven, so that we might cover the city with eyes. We worship the coffin, because it symbolizes the weight of our faith.
On February 12, 1912, Fitzroy made several voxophone recordings to explain her past.
When I first seen Columbia, that sky was the brightest, bluest sky that ever was. Seemed like heaven. Then your eyes adjusted to the light, and you saw that sea of white faces looking hard back at you. Days at Comstock House was simple. Hard work, sure, but simple. Wringing the linen, scrubbing the floors. Lady Comstock, she even had a kind word now and then. Almost enough to make me think I had a place in their world. God made foolish girls so he could have something to play with. One day, ain't nobody noticed me. Then they think I done for Lady Comstock, and well, everybody noticed me. I head to Finkton, and I hide deep. The more they look, deeper I go. Only thing a color child can count on is the fact they invisible.
Comstock requested Ed Gaines to write his biography.
Father Comstock called on me today to write his biograph. Me. The man pays for exactly 100 pages in advance. Now, I'm half a Jew when I smell silver, so I say, Father, your flock would pay for 1,000. You know, why settle for less? And then the prophet looks to me and says, 100 will suffice, as I know how it ends. The prophet may know how his own biography is going to end, but I can scarcely fathom how I'm going to start it. I mean, other than the kid stuff you get at the Hall of Heroes, anything prior to his baptism was, and here I quote, hang on, left on the riverside. They'll call me a plagiarist, but I'm going to spend the first 30 pages regurgitating scripture.
The working men in Columbia, especially the ones working for Fink, were having a difficult time just trying to live. On March 3rd, Chief Thacker announced that all Vox Populi would feel the force of Columbia's police. Meanwhile, Ty Bradley was a worker on Monument Island. The scientists had been studying Elizabeth's abilities, and Bradley could tell that they were scared of what she could do.
I guess even in a restricted area, these crackers need someone to clean the floors. Those politicians and scientists don't bother about what they say around me, because I'm some half-leaded colored boy. But I can tell they scared out of their wits by that thing they got locked upstairs. Yes, sir. They got a dog about to tell, and they don't know whether to hang on or run.
The one thing people need to learn is that fear is the antidote to fear. I don't want to be a part of their world. I don't want to be a part of their culture, their politics, They're people. The sun is setting on their world, and soon enough, all they gonna see is the dark.
Comstock boasted the part he played in Wounded Knee and the Boxer Rebellion. Slate, however, knew of no Comstock playing part in Wounded Knee, and he publicly accused Comstock of lying.
I served 20 years of soldiering, and every heathen land I've known has less peopled for my passing. I hated no special enemy. Until now. Comstock. He's made a vaudeville travesty of my battles and cast himself as the White Knight. I called him out over it, and he stripped me of my rank. That man has never seen the savage face of war. But he will.
As punishment, Comstock demoted Slate, removing his authority. Slate planned on revenge. By this time, Fink found that expeditions for sea slugs was incredibly costly, and his finances on vigors began to decline. So he began to develop a plan to switch to injectable vigors.
Sea slugs. Goddamn sea slugs. Could that Oriental have come up with a more inconvenient fuel for his plasmids? If there is a God, and I've seen more evidence to the contrary than in support, you'd think he'd have put Adam into the belly of a nice little seagull or crow. The cost of all these underwater expeditions are murdering my margins.
A man named Byron Cotswold had a run-in with the cult that worshipped Lady Comstock. His co-worker Otis took a box from one of them, and he wanted to see inside of it.
Otis works up at the lodge part-time. He took this box from one of their secret ceremonies, and I know for sure there is something dear inside. Problem is, Otis is more fool than not. He didn't bother to also secure a key from the Feathered Brothers to open the damn thing.
Frustrated at the police's failure, Comstock hired an assassin to kill Fitzroy. The assassin, Preston E. Dawes, obliged.
Comstock came by the wagon at dawn. Man was just transfixed by my trophy scalps. Asked about the white ones there. I said, well, sir, if your quarry dwells in the jungle and beds down with the local color, why split hairs? Not a chuckle out of him. Either he ain't seen a man go native, or maybe too many. Anyhow, now he's got me hunting down this Daisy Fitzroy. Hope he don't expect me to stuff and mount her. Yeah.
Many of the workers on the experiments conducted in Columbia had their protests silenced to their dismay.
Now, I know there's been some concern about the nature of the work we do here at Fink Manufacturing. Why, some say they're uncomfortable with the purported harm and suffering our research brings. But friends, let me pose a simple question. Is there anything you would not do to guarantee the health and safety of your loved ones? My interest is the future health of your children. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Mr. Thompson, sir, I replaced the entire fuse banker's ass, and the lights were all in working order last night? There they go again. We go through boxes of fuses every day as of late. Just in the siphon alone, I don't... Oh, something's happening.
Bradley was working in the siphon when an electrical short caused by one of the experiments killed him. On July 5th, Comstock saw through some tears events of the future. He saw a man marked with AD on his hand coming for him, amongst many other viewers of the future. He publicly warned Columbia to beware what he called the false shepherd.
It's one thing to imagine one's future, and another to see it. I have seen the seeds of fire that will prepare the Sodom below for the coming of the Lord. But Elizabeth shall sow those seeds, not I. I will fall before the job is done. But she shall take up my mantle. The Lord is calling me home. I feel his love in every tumor, because they are the train which takes me to his station. And I go with joy, knowing that Elizabeth will take my earthly place. But the false shepherd is coming to lead my lamb astray. I will not board that train until she is safe from his deceptions.
Meanwhile, Preston began to catch up to Fitzroy. He left her a message and gun, daring her to challenge him.
Old Preston is a sporting man, Miss Fitzroy. I won't steal up on you while you slumber like these Vox boys here, with their pig stickers. That's one scalp to me. That's two. Now when you hear this, I want you to square your affairs and come die in the side of the poets. You'll need a white man's weapon. Give this a try.
Got a tip there were contraband guns hidden in the fellow traveler. Didn't find them, but funny thing, we found some old uniforms under the floorboards from the war. Took guesses as to why they were there, but... Who's there? You're Slate, right? Sir? Put the guns down!
Did you hear that, Comstock? That is the sound you have never heard. The sound of a soldier's end. Come to your Hall of Heroes. Prove me a liar.
Slate, angry at being demoted and worried that motorized patriots may replace real soldiers, formed a rebellion on July 6th, the same day as Columbia's annual celebration of independence. He gathered as many soldiers as he could so that he could take down the hypocritical Comstock. He stole Lady Comstock's diary and found out how Elizabeth was not sainted in any way.
I hold in my hand the private journal of Comstock's wife. It puts the lie to this miracle child nonsense. She loved the child not. It seems the sainted lady would have preferred to let the seed of the prophet just dry out on the bedsheets.
Veterans! You shed your heart's blood for Columbia, lost limb and viscera in the godless Orient. Comstock did nothing! And yet, look up! Whose image squats above you even now? At every angle and insult! If the prophet would make a painted whore of our past, what fresh rape does our future hold? Let us now make our stand and fill yonder hole with true heroes!
Slate and his men boarded up the Hall of Heroes to use as their base of operations. Slate allied with Fitzroy so he could take down Comstock with additional forces.
They'll call us assassins when our work is done. Cornelius Slate, the swift left hook of the Vox Populi. We'll be trading Comstock's life for a new one. So be it. The Fitzroy woman and I are comrades of necessity. I doubt all the men who reddened Caesar's toga would still be seen breaking bread together in peacetime. With Comstock gone, my men's past deeds will be sacred, and they will claim the spoils due them. I need not live to see it.
Even though the Lutesses no longer had a strictly corporeal existence, they continued their plan to right the wrongs they had done. On the day of Columbia's Independence Day and Slate's rebellion, they managed to open a tear to the reality where Booker refused baptism. Booker had spent the past decades wallowing in self-pity, ashamed of how he sold his daughter Anna. The Lutesses offered him a second chance, and he stepped through the tear. Unfortunately, Booker was unable to do much to fix the Lutesses' wrongs. They tried repeatedly, hundreds, if not thousands of times, with alternate versions of Booker to try to see if one might succeed. The cognitive dissonance Booker experienced afterwards was customary of people who stepped through tears. Robert himself had suffered the same fate, so the Luteces tried to help him get to his senses. When Booker regained his bearings, he had formed new memories to acclimate to his new reality. He was in a canoe with the Luteces who were rowing towards the lighthouse that led to Columbia.